And then because your growth stagnates, some of your best people start to leave, right? Because some of your best people want to work in the fastest growing companies because that's where there's chaos and there's fun in actually creating sense of chaos, right?
Hi, and welcome to the June podcast. I'm your host, Enzo, co-founder at June. In this show, I'm talking to the most inspiring product and growth leaders out there who will share their tips on how to launch and grow your SaaS. No fuss, no BS. I hope you enjoyed the show. Hello, Arash, and welcome to the podcast. How are things?
And so thank you so much for inviting me. Things are good. Thank you. How are you doing?
Doing great. I'm really excited to have you here and chat about product and building startups. You really have a unique experience, so I can't wait for you to share about that.
Yeah, should be fun. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. So a bit about yourself. You define yourself, I saw that on your LinkedIn, as a product and venture builder at heart. You worked for 2 years plus at Pleo as the VP of Product Growth. So we're going to talk about product growth a lot, where you are accountable for the product-led revenue growth. Prior to that, you worked as the director of product at Klarna for 3 years. And before that, you worked for the bank Barclays and then Barclays card payments for 4 years and 2 years, correct?
That is correct. So I currently head up Pleo's SMB customer segment. And just for context, I think 80% of our customers are SMB, meaning all things revenue, distribution, and product-led growth, as you described. Before that, at Pleo, I headed up our international expansion efforts, where we opened 10 new markets in 10 months, which was quite a fun ride. And before Pleo, I worked at Klarna on their merchant strategy. And then before that, at Barclays, doing a bunch of things.
So you have a really deep domain expertise into fintech, correct, in a way?
Deep knowledge or not, but I love fintech, yes.
So what is specific about it that brought you there, you think?
So I think I grew up in a family of businessmen, entrepreneurs. No one has gone to university, no one went to school, and I think everyone just talked about like being resourceful and making businesses work. So every dinner time conversation was talking about ideas and talking about making money off it in maybe like a bad way. So I ended up actually doing engineering. So I was like a bit of a black sheep in the family. I love technology. I wanted to join a Formula One team, not as a driver, but more as an aerodynamics engineer. But I don't think I really found my calling just being an engineer. And I think at that point, I pivoted a little bit more on the financial side of things, on the economic side of things. And that's where I think I felt a lot more intuitive understanding of how businesses work. And I think working in a bank as my first job, I think that felt a lot more intuitive. I think coming from that background of talking about businesses all the while. Then I think at some point at Barclays, I pivoted into payments. And that's where I nerded out payments quite a lot. And I really enjoyed it. Really loved understanding how the different providers in the whole payment ecosystem work, payment processors, payment acquirer, issuers, merchants, customers. And then that, I think, sort of paved my way for Klarna for a few years. And then lately, I've been venturing a lot more on the commercial and revenue side, which I feel comes a lot more, I think, intuitively to me. But I think at heart, I'm still a product person.
So let's touch on that, if you will, for a couple of seconds. So your current role is on product growth, what you call product growth, which can mean a lot of different things. And you already touched on the aspect that it touches commercial responsibilities. So could you share a bit with the people listening what really product growth is about? And why maybe it's useful to have such people?
Yeah, absolutely. So fundamentally, I think, as I see it, product-led growth is about two main beliefs. One, giving customers a choice and meeting them where they already are, which in most cases is in the product flows. And second, I think it's like hyper-personalization to make it super relevant for a customer's unique situation, setup, and needs. Now, all of this translates to great customer experience, naturally, but also stickiness, which is good for the business too, through higher retention and much stronger unit economics across the entire customer journey. And if I talk a little bit about PLG in the Pleo context, we see it hugely as a distinct distribution motion, which relies on the product being consumed as the primary driver for customer acquisition, activation, retention, and expansion. And it's layered across the entire customer journey through all stages, and not only the early stages, which is how it's championed in like a typical PLG selling company. And PLG for us at Pleo, it sits alongside our more traditional pronounced sales-led distribution motion. And we don't use PLG instead of sales-led distribution, right? So we see the world as more hybrid. And that's how we look at PLG and then the benefits as well.
You said earlier that you're taking care, mostly focusing on the SMB. And now you touch on PLG. So you don't split PLG and the rest of the acquisition, but at the same time, it seems that PLG is more or less relevant for the SMB market. Is that the case?
That was the myth, is how we started. We started PLG more as a bottoms-up led acquisition, trying to combine it with the more tops-down sales-led acquisition, right? We started PLG to serve the smallest and the customers which have the least complexity. Over time, I think over the last, 12 months or so, we have seen the benefits of PLG are actually agnostic to a customer segment. We see a lot of really big companies wanting to try out Pleo without speaking to a human being, wanting to become a Pleo customer without trying to speak to a human being. In fact, we see them activating different features that are relevant to them. We see them adding more users. We see them also growing on a higher plan, right? So in some ways, we have broken this myth and the assumption that we also had internally that PLG is synonymous with our smallest customers, but right now we see PLG is actually useful for most of the customers. The trick becomes, how do you combine that well with your human force, if I can call it that, and where they can add more value than what you build in the product at the right time, at the right moment, for the right customers, right? So that's the thing that we have been working through right now. But yes, I think we start off with PLG being synonymous with SMB, but now I think it's growing much broader than that.
That is very promising. It's really exciting to hear that. So PLG is not just about the sign up or the early activation. It's really about the ongoing journey, activating on all the use cases needed for that specific, profile of customer, and so on and so forth, right?
Yep, exactly.
I think it's Slack that has this crazy metric where I think they said that 80 or 90% of the enterprise customers came through self-serve.
I think, it's 70% roughly like that. And I think we have done some internal surveys as well with customers of all sizes. And we typically see 60, 70% customers preferring to self-serve, get educated themselves. I think the nuances come when there's like a complicated setup or when there's a complex entity where they have multiple entities in different markets, or if there's an accounting integration which is relevant to, let's say, Pleo's context, where you then need a human being to do the hand-holding, right? Like there are certain things which doesn't matter however intuitive you build from a design perspective, you somehow need that human being to actually build that trust as well, right?
So let's touch on that a little bit more. We're going to touch a lot on what is PLG, how it's done, examples and so on, but really the why it works. Why does it work? Is it because people have changed and now if they can avoid to talk to a human, they would maybe prefer? Does it work because it's more efficient, like you save time? Or in some circumstances, you have the human touch and so it's reassuring, like, what's happening there? Why is it taking off, in your opinion?
It's a combination of things. One is like PLG doesn't work if you don't have a great product. So first of all, you need a kick-ass product and the user experience design has to be amazing. So I can't emphasize enough how crucial this is. Like sometimes PLG becomes a product in itself. It's actually just a means to something, right? And if your product is not intuitive or not easy to navigate, then everything else is useless. Second, I think we at Pleo, and I think I see that in a lot of companies like Miro as an example, right? Where there's a conscious investment into brand building. I think those two things become really important, where with brand building, I think certain level of trust comes from within. And then I think the simplicity of the product then makes it easy to guide the customers to the right point, right path, right features at the right point, depending on, I think, seeing certain customers' behaviors or actions, right? That's where I think product-led growth then becomes much more relevant. Like I was describing, then I think the challenge for us becomes experimenting a little bit more, where a human being can still add more value on top of everything that we have built, versus where a human being actually is not that required, because also the customer's preferences that they would rather do the servicing themselves. So we also offer options like hand raisers, as an example, to the customers to say, look, you have the option to speak to a human being, just let us know. And I think we have that available throughout the end-to-end value chain.
So it's a customer preference. It's also internal arbitrage, right? Sometimes I assume building product to solve problem may be more costly, at least upfront.
Yes.
Do you also think about it from a cost perspective?
Yeah, I think cost is an element, definitely, especially with how the macroeconomic situation has changed. You don't have just like human beings to throw at a problem, right? Like I think maybe it becomes more relevant when you're trying to validate certain things. And that's where I think it's maybe a little bit easier to get it validated through human beings and building it in a cheaper way before then laying out all the tracks. I think we've also seen PLG being a huge enabler in terms of our path to profitability, because I think over time, your cost to service the customers go down, and PLG in some ways then scales infinitely as compared to obviously human beings. If you're trying to grow 100% next year, then you need to in some ways increase your cost base to attract more leads, have more human beings to sell it to them, to service them, have like more investment in customer support, customer success. But if you do PLG well, then I think it becomes like a non-linear play with growth, that you don't need to then invest almost linearly in terms of cost to get the same revenue, right? And then over time, PLG then helps you build stronger margins, which is now becoming a lot more important than just like revenue growth.
And that only happens if the product is really, really good, right? It's not just, you don't just layer PLG on top of crap product. You need a great product. And you said something very interesting. You say PLG almost becomes its own product. So does it mean that basically there is almost like a product roadmap only for PLG in a way, or how is this happening? And also let's maybe touch now at the same time about on the where product growth exactly sit in the organization, because I guess these two topics are tied together.
We do have a roadmap, obviously, because you still need some level of I think commitment from the teams in terms of I think what they're going to build, what they're going to ship and stuff like that. The way I describe it, or at least one of my product director, he describes it, is it's almost like imagine a football game or like a music event. There are going to be certain teams who are going to be actually running the event themselves, which for me, if I describe it in Pleo's context, is the teams that are building the core value, the core features, right? Like the offering to the customers. But then there are always going to be teams which are going to be promoting, which is going to be creating the awareness, which is going to be guiding different people from different segments of the society to different points in the stand, right? And that's what I think PLG teams does for us, right? Like it's to guide the right customers to the right feature at the right time. And that becomes really important. In terms of, I think, the roadmap, we do have a more traditional roadmap in terms of, I think, what we're going to deliver, how that's going to impact our key results, what sort of KPIs then become important. The roadmap is in a huge ways tied to what our offering teams are actually building, right? Because if you're not continuing to create value for the customers, like I said, then PLG is almost useless. You can solve it from an efficiency point of view, and I think it's great for the customers. Beyond a point, I think you need certain teams who just can constantly be going for creating pure value for the customers.
So it's not like this growth team which is completely isolated with its own roadmap and try to move whatever is possible. It's like a strategic alignment with the other teams and enabling almost on a per use case basis the roadmap. Would you be able to share some examples of growth initiatives that you had in the past, whether like this year, last year, years back? And how like maybe they were aligning between teams? That would be super cool to hear.
Can you guide me a little bit more in terms of what kind of examples, like tons of examples that I can go into?
Yeah, I mean, simply just a growth initiatives or strategies that played a role in driving the growth of the company, whatever was the main KPI, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So they've done tons. I think traditionally, so we are an 8-year-old company, by the way. I think for the longest part of our history, we have always preferred that every lead coming in speaks to a salesperson, and that's how the whole discovery process happened, and that's how anyone became a Pleo customer. Very recently, because we've been doing a lot of experiments on the website along with our growth marketing team, and there's like a lot of, I think, conversion rate optimization efforts that are being put in. One of the things that the team tried with is after some research, to put an interactive product demo on the website, which is basically, I think, takes away the need for someone to speak to a human being up to a certain degree, obviously, right? Like it cannot completely remove it. But this is something that we're also constantly hearing from our new leads, new customers, and customers that they would prefer to self-serve themselves, right? So the moment we launched this interactive product demo on the website, which you can, by the way, try it out as well, we saw almost 10x better conversion as compared to any other entry point on the website. This idea, by the way, went from an idea to proof of concept in just, I think, 3 or 4 days because we use like a service provider. And that has been immense because then suddenly a lot of your sales teams can then start to focus on where I think the complexity is higher or where the value is higher rather than every lead having to speak to a salesperson. So that's like an initiative. Then obviously we have examples on implementing the whole trial experience where we allow a customer to experience the real value without speaking to a human being. That's been immense in terms of attracting top of the funnel value. Also, I think when they become Pleo customers, we now do guided tours. We do more education on areas where customers find it challenging. How do we also increase trust? Because at the end of the day, you are a financial product and you're asking them to deposit some money before they can start using Pleo. So I think there's like a lot of experiments going there. Another example over there is pushing virtual cards, which was very interesting because quite often in countries like Germany and France, and I'm not trying to generalize it massively, but we saw people were hesitant to deposit money in the Pleo account before they got the physical card. And the natural assumption there is they were worried that if the cards got lost in the mail, then their money is at stake, right? We did some education. We showed them that they can actually start using virtual cards, Apple Pay, Google Pay, right? And suddenly we saw like 50 to 60% higher activation and earlier time to spend and time to value because they could start to now understand that they could start using Pleo with virtual cards without having to wait for physical cards, right? And those are some of the experiments that you would typically see from the PLG teams a lot more because our teams, as I think I describe it internally, is we take care of the experience end to end because you're not trying to build like a vertical feature. Whereas any other team which is building an offering cares about that feature, but may or may not see the holistic end-to-end view of the customer. And that's where I think my teams become a lot more value adding in some regards.
It's so you guys are almost like the oil in the machine, right? People are building the gear and you're kind of oiling things up.
Yes, exactly. That's a great way of putting it, by the way.
I just want to touch on this one because you mentioned a lot of like removing the friction topics. There is this big debate of, sometime friction maybe being a bit good, not too much, of course. Do you have any opinion on that, or even maybe data point or surprising test? You I don't know. You remove something, thought it would increase the conversion, realize it actually really didn't help.
I think so. Some friction is okay as long as you are very clear on what you're optimizing for, and also being very clear that the thing that you're optimizing for is not just a vanity KPI for that part of the funnel, right? Like I try to bring the teams back to first principle, right? Like money in, money out, customer in, customer out, right? Like everything else is supporting a little bit of that. But maybe I think talking a little bit about friction, we see, I think, our sales teams being very like value-based selling in some ways, right? And we tried experimenting a little bit in the product to see if customers naturally with the education that we did would pick up an annual contract directly in the product. And especially I think with the macro situation changing, it becomes difficult for someone to commit upfront for 12 months, right? And we see as an example that friction where they have to speak to someone to sign an annual contract actually pays dividend because a human being is, and I think a salesperson is a lot better at selling the overall value of an annual contract, which may or may not have to pay upfront. You could still pay it in portions, but selling, let's say, longer term contracts as an example, a friction in some ways is good as compared to trying to do that in the product. So that's one example that I could bring up where I think adding some friction is not bad. The other thing is about trust as well, especially I think with the money flow, and because we are a spend management provider and bookkeeping is such an important aspect and accounting is such an important aspect. I think sometimes hand-holding the customers on how an integration could work with, like, let's say the likes of Zero or Datev in Germany or Fortnox in Sweden, goes a long way in building that initial trust, where then they end up becoming customers for a really long time, as compared to, I think, constantly just focusing on PLG. We see that, I think, especially right now, where more CFOs, as they start to consolidate the tools, if you don't have some form of a relationship with your biggest customers internally, then I think it's very easy to pull the plug, right? Because you've never actually spoken to a human being. So I see friction a little bit in terms of, is this a way where we can build or enable great relationships for the future, where I think the customers see you more than just a tool, but actually a set of values or human beings that they feel connected to.
That's super interesting. So it's almost like product led, but
human enabled.
Human enabled. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
That's the one I was looking for. So there are two follow-up questions on this one. So I haven't asked you yet how exactly the team is set up for success. So do you sit in the product org? Do you sit in the revenue org in between? When you're working with other teams, do you, I don't know, shadow develop with them? Do you have your own roadmap and you're trying to align the roadmap? Like, how is this thing happening exactly?
Yeah, absolutely. So my teams on the PLG side, we sit on the distribution or the go-to-market side of the company. But we have a dotted into the product organization as well. All of my product-led growth teams, they are your more, I think, traditional maker or builder teams with like engineers, designers, user research, and now I think lately also peppered with product marketing and content design. But each of the team is paired with a commercial team. So I'll give you an example where the team that owns the sign-up and the trial experience, they are paired with our new business sales teams, where they try to have the same vision and the same KPI. In this case, it becomes trying to acquire new customers and then the new business revenue that you acquire. But then the product-led team also acts as a feeder to the commercial team. In this regard, can we provide very well qualified product leads to the sales team? So the sales teams are very diligent and efficient in terms of which customers they should speak with, in what order, and what is the value messaging they lead with. I'll give you an example where a lead coming in, if they've spent certain amount of time going through different pages on our website, if they've checked out our pricing page, if they've enabled certain features in the trial, and if they use certain features, when then a salesperson comes in to land that customer, can they lead with those things that the customer is or the lead is already interested in? Or if they've clicked on an ad where we feel that that's where the intent is driven from, can the teams actually enable our sales team to do that, right? So each of my PLG teams is paired with a commercial team. Then the way we interface with the rest of the product organization, the organization that builds our offering, we do that in our quarterly OKR process and then we have like a half yearly strategy refresh as well, where there's like a clear guidance from the leadership, which is done in partnership with different business owners on where we should be headed. So the priorities are set there. And every quarter we try to refresh the key results that we're going for, right? Which then becomes an enabler for what my teams want to do in terms of roadmap. And then they do the interlock with different teams, which are going to be enabling, or we are going to be providing services to certain teams, right? And that's where the interlock happens. And then obviously we have like different cadences in terms of how we manage, track, those kind of things. But I think that's how the interlock happens. You have to set it up somewhere, right? Like you have to start somewhere. And because it started in the go-to-market side of the company, there was some isolation, a little bit naturally because you had to focus. But I think as we are starting to create clear impact, clear value in terms of driving adoption, driving retention, driving expansion for different features, now we see a lot more of our offering teams more, I think, forthcoming and proactively reaching out to say, hey, I'm building something like this. Could we solve for PLG or self-serve while we are doing the discovery, right? So that's been, I think, a positive shift where I think the teams collaborate much, much earlier now.
That's super interesting. I wonder how you assess the impact of the PLG team versus kind of the core team when you build something and how you've been promoting that. Did you have to go through this very painful exercise of like borrowing some data resources to prove the causation impact of your team once, or was it just like a general butt in from the org and the top level management, and and you guys are executing since then?
There's two parts to this. There's a part where I think there were teams before I came in, and I'm not trying to make me as the driver, but I think things were organized more functionally before I came in. There's a product org, there's a marketing org, there's a sales, yes, stuff like that, right? So I remember even before I came in, there was a team set up to do productized onboarding, and they were trying to do product-led sales. Naturally, they got a lot of friction from our sales teams because the fear was they're either going to take leads away, and that's going to then affect a salesperson's ability to hit their quota and their compensation and stuff like that, right? Then I think as I was coming in, we did a huge, I think, restructure of the organization in terms of the way we operated, right? So then we created very clear customer problems, which are strategically aligned to where the business wants to go. And these are problems which could have a vision for 12, 18, 24 months, right? So we restructured the organization. So we created this organization around SMB and PLG and brought all the relevant teams who were building in that space or who were operating in that space work together with the same goal, same KPI. What that did was I had an organization with a clear target, clear revenue target, and a clear cost envelope, which meant with that, I could figure out how many engineers I want to hire, how many data people I need, how many user researchers I need, right? In the pursuit of hitting that revenue goal, as well as I think whatever KPI we are trying to optimize. What that did, obviously, it optimizes for speed of execution, faster decision making, but in some ways, it's an expensive organization because you create duplications, right? Like you have a lot more data analysts because you're not sharing resources, right? So then obviously I think as we have gone through the transition to become more sustainable and efficient as an organization, now we have somewhat more shared resources. But I would say I think I and my teams have been very, very privileged, at least in the way we set up, that there was a huge buy-in from the organization, from the leadership, that we wanted to go in the product-led growth direction because that's going to be efficient. That's what the customers are asking for. So the investment was there. I didn't have to like beg, borrow, steal. I have to do that a little bit more because I think that's just the right thing to do for the company. You can't have that many just floating resources. But because the foundation is so strong and the impact is now there to be seen, it becomes less of a fight.
This is great to hear because I think this is where the setup works the best. You know, you really need some time to make this strategy work. Really, there is two things I would love to touch on. The first thing is I wonder how the kind of the C-level of the kind of the top level build that intuition. I wonder if it's because some sort of like very hard, strong PMF on the market where you guys wanted to launch the PLG, or if there was any signals maybe that you heard about for this strategy to happen. So maybe we can start there. Do you know what kind of like syndicated that decision?
So we are now a company which is in multiple geographies, 16 markets. We're in multiple segments, 3 to be precise. We are a multi-product company now, right? So the prioritization challenge is real. And for the last few years, we've been trying to go up market because that was the strategy that was agreed upon, defined at a Pleo level. This was also predicated on the fact that we were starting to see very good signals in terms of product market fit in SMB. We were set up as an organization which was traditionally always very sales-led and customer success-led and marketing-led, right? Like, so very heavy on the human foresight. As we started to go up market and we started to see good signals in terms of win rate or conversion towards that segment, we naturally felt we had to move most of our human force sales, CS, marketing efforts towards that, with the assumption that like SMB as a segment becomes more about solving for efficiency than about effectiveness, right? So also, I think if you think about it, the needs of a mid-market customer are a lot more complex, right? So then your investment in terms of what you build has to also go there, over towards there, right? So if you think about maybe an example, the same employee in now a larger company needs to play with Pleo, right? With various payment methods. They want to manage their teams. The finance team now wants to stay in control, but they also want to optimize spend and overall steer the business, which is very different from how we started, where the use case was an employee wants to pay with Pleo, they want to capture the receipt and bookkeep it, right? So then the needs have evolved, and I think we have sort of in some ways followed the path of our customers. So the offering has become a lot more focused on pay, manage, control, optimize tier. And that requires, I think, focus. And that's how I think we have shifted. But everything that we now build in the mid-market segment also ends up, I think, benefiting the SMB customers naturally, right? But the focus, like I said, I think in that segment is to nail the efficient distribution and the serving mechanism, because it's predicated on the fact that we have strong product market fit in the SMB segment. And I think that's been one of the main drivers towards that.
I love that. That's last time you and I, we had a quick chat and you told me exactly that thing, which is we focus on the mid-market, but we know that most of these things we build will benefit the bottom of the market. I really find that fascinating, because usually the main risk when you build for the upper market, whatever this upper market means for you, is that you abandon the bottom one, right? And then there is a gap between the two. And you folks are like constantly trying to stick the two bits together.
Yeah, and I think we see that, like Brex, as an example, which is one of the competitors in the US, exited the SMB market last year, like complete exit.
To focus on what? On the bottom of the market?
No, they exited the SMB to only focus on enterprise and mid-market,
okay.
right?
Okay.
So, because I think, it's somewhat easier to get some form of product market fit in SMB, but it's really difficult to make the unit economics work in SMB, because your average contract size or the revenue per user in SMB is so small. And if you have been set up like I think how Pleo is, and I think in most cases, you are so heavy on the sales and marketing side that the cost is just so much proportionally higher to financially make sense of what revenue you're going to make in SMB, right? The only way I see it working is if you move that shift, that human force towards mid-market, where naturally I think the contracts are higher, right? But then I think you make SMB more focused on being efficient, right? And we were, I think, very clear that we never wanted to abandon our main segment, which is SMB still, but do it in a way which made sense for the continuous operation of the business as well, right? Like at the end of the day, you are still a commercial business. And I think we see a lot of, I think, maybe fringe benefits of continuing to now build in mid-market, which benefits the SMB, right? Because if you think about from an end customer perspective, they don't care that we are present in 16 markets. They don't care that we are trying to build for mid-market. A mom and pop shop, they want to care about if Pleo can support them or not, right? And if we can't, then I think they'll go to the next provider.
Yeah, exactly. And they want to make sure that you will keep investing on them, right? They want to make sure the product is not set in stone.
Yes.
Can we touch a bit on the hardship of PLG? So you touch a bit on the challenges, but what are the three really hard things you guys had to go through with PLG? The things that breaks, the things that people don't see coming, maybe, stuff maybe you can talk about,
Three things if I'll mention, and maybe I've touched upon these things in different formats, but let's condense it. So one is, I think, early on, pushback from sales, because naturally, like I said, I think it creates this notion that we are trying to take away the leads or take away the revenue. Whereas I think we're very clear that PLG is not being built instead of sales-led. It's being built to support sales-led and in fact make it a very well-functioning, I think, hybrid setup, right? So I think that I would say is one challenge. The second one was, I think, how we do investment towards revenue operation. So putting, I think, PLG on top of an sales-led organization, RevOps or commercial operations or revenue operations is built for a traditional go-to-market organizations, right? So making sure that we adjust our processes, our toolings, the way we forecast to cater for this new distribution motion, right? Similarly, I think building our core product offering, like I was saying, with this new customer preference in mind, like how do we solve for awareness? How do we solve for activation, usage, monetization in a self-serve way, without having the privilege that everything that you build, a human being will be there for each interaction, right? So I would say that is the second, which is more around prioritization across the rest of the organization, which are more the enabling teams. And third, I think I touched upon that, which is breaking this notion that PLG is only effective in the lower segment. Of course, I think the more complex a customer's setup or buying process gets, the more you need a human being to add value. But we saw very strong pickup and traction of PLG across all of our customer segments. And that just took time to prove that, right? So I would say, I think those are the three big challenges. Sitting on this huge privilege, like I said, that there was a huge buy-in from the executive leadership. That's partly also why I was brought in to lead all things product-led, that the buy-in was there to say, now let's accelerate it, right? So I have this privilege in the background, But I think I would say these were the main challenges.
That sounds like very tough challenge to solve, especially the one with the sales-led organization. I wonder, so at the end of the day, what you're trying to prove is that the outcome is better for the organization, right?
Words are only going to go so far. You need to show it with actions. You need to prove it with results, right? Like, so I think maybe bringing the organizations together with like the same goal rather than like a product leader trying to push PLG and then not really caring about the revenue. I think that has helped in some ways to create that confidence and trust in the organization that what we are doing is good for the customers, good for the business, but also good for our people. And with that, naturally, once you get product-led bringing 30-40% of revenue with high level of confidence and high level of predictability, you can essentially go for a higher target, right? You can essentially increase the targets that your teams can go for.
So let's touch a little bit on data. You just did that, luckily for me. What is a typical, maybe high level or low level KPI you would look at? So you just mentioned like the portion of the revenue coming from PLG. I wonder if there is any way you can measure efficiency, maybe per head count. I don't know if you want to get into that. And then you earlier on, you talk about the success, I think, of the adoption of the features. So I guess there was something around that too. Could you work through like a typical, I don't know, OKR process for you or KPI process? I don't know what you use.
Yeah, I mean, we use OKRs and we also have KPIs. But I think like most companies, like I was alluding to a little bit, we start on the top of the funnel by allowing our customers to sign up without speaking to a sales rep, right? That's how we started. Naturally, the main KPI there was adoption of that flow and the conversion we got, right? And then you start comparing the conversion of that versus when a human being comes in, right? Then we applied the same principle across the entire customer value chain. So acquisition, onboarding, activation, retention, growth. The KPIs that we care about now, I think maybe taking it a little bit back to the first principle is the customers that you're getting and the revenue that you get with PLG and sales-led combined, right? On both new business and expansion, right? That's the macro KPI that I'm measured on, which is good for the business, right? Because then otherwise it becomes very easy to get bogged down into the attribution challenges. If someone just touches a customer, is that really sales-led or how was it qualified, right? Now, underneath, obviously, because we're in the same business unit, we do have PLG KPI for each of the stages, right? Let's say if you think about onboarding, how many customers get to value, however we define value in 30 days, right? And then what share of that happens in a self-survey. But the team, the product team, and the team responsible for onboarding looks at it together to see how they can increase self-serve where relevant, rather than each team optimizing for their own KPI and then going somewhat orthogonal. Then in terms of efficiency, we used to look at quite a lot in terms of CAC payback. Naturally, I think that's a great metric to look at efficiency, but I think it's still somewhat focused on the top of the funnel, right? So we still look at it. When we started, our CAC payback was very bad, I would say, maybe 24, 30 months, right? So it's really bad. Now I think we've gotten it close to 14 months or so, right? So it's already touching in the world class. We want to push it further to 10 months or so. We have also started to look at more holistically across the lifetime value. So we look at LTV to CAC. And we look at LTV to CAC for different segments, right? And what LTV to CAC tells us is how strong and effective of a motion you have in each of the segments, right? Typically, I think companies go for 3:1 lifetime value per CAC. We are trying to go for 5:1. We are trying to compare it to the best in class and then trying to smash that. So it's a lagging KPI, right? But that's something that we keep it in the planning process just to ensure that there is a clear focus there, right? Then I think there's like maybe tertiary KPIs we look at. We look at conversion, we look at a sales rep's quota and all the efficiency that is created by a PLG. Are we able to increase the quota of a sales rep, right? Because they're not just doing it by themselves, it's happening with PLG. We look at onboarding velocity, time to value, like I said. We look at user growth as well. And then feature adoption, we look at it, or at least we were looking at it, but we realized it was in some ways a path to retention or customer happiness, right? So we did some correlation analysis to see which are our happiest customers or most successful customers and what features or what actions enable that. And then we try to push for that. But rather than saying, do we need to push for adoption of invoice? because then I think you're not really solving for a customer problem, you're actually solving for a feature problem.
And that's a whole set of metrics. It's to be like very, very well covered. And yes, of course, like the overall retention of your product is the sum of the usage of the features, right? In a way,
correct.
As simple as that. I guess you guys are VC backed. You've raised, you have announced a round not so long time ago. If you put that whole metric topic and you talk about the LTV, right? It was this kind of like long-term return on investment. And if you put that in perspective with like the fact that you guys are raising money, does it mean that it's allowing you to invest upfront in what you think are the long-term channels you should invest in, and it allows you to take some almost like a competitive edge in the future? You know what I mean? Like it seems to be the way you think about this one almost.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I can give you 2 examples on that. I think we got extremely lucky with the fundraise, like a lot of companies. In end of 2021, I think we raised 350 million at the top of the cycle. It's a privileged position to be in. I think great kudos go to our founders, but also I think the people who were here before me, right? Like I sort of came in to ride the wave. I didn't create the wave. So I think there's a huge element of that. We made some choices. One choice was to build the financial infrastructure ourselves, which is a slow process, which is a hard process. Especially I think if you're trying to solve a consumer problem, why would you not a consumer, a customer problem, why would you not just plug and play when there are banking providers out there, right? When there are infrastructure providers. In the early stages, we decided to invest in that. Now, the way I think it's paying dividends is we control bulk of the gross margin because we own the financial infrastructure. Now, I think if you look at our competition, where they've started off really quickly and gone to 100 million in revenue mark very quickly, most of them don't own the financial revenue. What that does is you have a solid foundation. When we expanded into more markets, it was much easier for us to expand into new markets being a financial entity because we control the financial infrastructure, right? And now as investors care a lot more about margin and profitability, I think that puts us into a driver's seat. That's one. Second example I wanted to give you is, I think historically, from a customer acquisition point of view, we were very focused on the paid channels. And I think that paid good dividends, but we also realized that's not a long-term strategy. So over the last, I think, 2-3 years, we have been diversifying our acquisition strategy as well, right? The big enabler for that is because of the equity and the cash that we raise, it allows us to go and experiment. We experimented on the SEO side, on different channels, on partnerships, a little bit on the outbound side as well, just to see what sort of mix we get. And now, like I was describing, we look at each channel across each segment, across each country with this lens of LTV to CAC, because then that becomes the main lens, which allows us to go efficient where things are actually working out well, right? So, yeah, I think it comes at a bit of a privilege where we have a very good runway right now. And I think it puts some of those existential questions away and you can just focus on company building. Rather than having to solve tactically for the next month and the month after.
And that's great news. And I remember this is building the financial system was also the decision that N26 did when I worked there. And it's a very hard decision to make because you're slowly, basically you're like almost paralyzing your roadmap for years.
Yes.
And you see all the competitors shipping crazy cool features and you're just building this infra that, by the way, your customers will have a hard time to understand, right? Because they don't see the
customers don't understand.
They don't see the difference.
And then because your growth stagnates, some of your best people start to leave, right? Because some of your best people want to work in the fastest growing companies because that's where there's chaos and there's fun in actually creating a sense of chaos, right? So it's a very difficult choice. And I think I'm in some ways glad that Pleo did that even before my time. And I think I can now come and tell this amazing story.
100%. Tough one, but good to make it. So in this competitive landscape, I'd like to open, it's the end of the conversation, I'd like to open with a bit some thoughts about the future. When you think about the landscape of fintech and expense management, what do you think are some key trends that are or innovation you believe in that will shape the industry in the coming years? Maybe how is Pleo, positioning itself to stay ahead of that curve?
We talk about this quite a lot. So I can maybe mention a few things. So I think maybe 3-4 years ago, Andreessen Horowitz came with this quote that every company becomes a fintech company. So every company can become Yes, exactly. So there's obviously explosion of infrastructure companies, KYC, AML, data APIs, bank accounts as a service, issuers, processors, I think, plopping up everywhere. So I think that's a key trend that we naturally keep an eye on, because what that does is it enables any company to do spend management, any company to do any fintech stuff, right? So you got to see what are the most obvious needs of a customer. And if those needs are served somewhere else, would spend management also be served somewhere else, right? So how do you continue to create a competitive moat and that crazy stickiness, which will give this impression to the customer that yes, Pleo is still the right thing to go for, right? So that I would say is one thing we look for. I did mention, I think, financial infrastructure, but I will also say compliance as a competitive advantage. I think how deep you are in terms of building that, especially as a financial services company, how quickly you allow a customer to sign up, right? Because if you're just a B2C app, a non-fintech, it's very easy to sign up, right? Whereas if you're a financial services company, you have to do the KYC, you have to do due diligence, right? If you do a lot of that in-house, you just control the rules engine a lot more. So that's something we look at. Then I think I will talk a bit naturally about the buzz these days around AI and LLMs. I think that's definitely reshaping our industry, our jobs, and naturally that's also how people spend and manage their company spend, right? Both how we run Pleo's business, that's something that we're looking at. So do we do customer support in 10x better? Can we do outbounding or prospecting 10x better, right? That's something that we're looking at. But also I think how does this technology also helps our customers with the business plan? I touched a little bit about how do we help a CFO who's a key decision maker be in the driver's seat, right? Like, can we end up becoming the financial co-pilot where they come and ask us questions like, hey, I want to hire 2 FTs next month. Am I in a position to do that, right? Like, I'm now making it very simplistic, but that is something that we look for and we are building for. Decentralization, maybe it's not a technology, but more in terms of how the workforce is right now. And I think more and more employees want to own their lives rather than, I think, have work and life separated. So then I think hence trust and accountability becomes key in running a modern day workforce, right? And Pleo, I think, is really well sort of set up to support that. Then I think if you think about as a spend management provider, what we got to do is we got to go beyond the books. I think there's a huge need for a lot more automation. People want things that just always works. Optimization becomes critical. And I think, like I touched upon, whatever I think explosion that may happen on the technological front, you will never be able to beat exceptional experiences, right? So then that human value becomes very critical, and that's something that we are trying to set up as a hybrid between all the automation, but like how do you still continue to deliver exceptional experiences? So I would say I think those are the key technological and I think like maybe more macro trends that we look at and how do we enable that. Maybe one last thing to mention is profitability. It's on everyone's mind, right? It's on Pleo's mind as well. So can we help a CFO steer in that direction? And that's where I think it goes to my point about financial co-pilot, right? So I feel Pleo is in a good step to do that, and that's what we focus on.
Very exciting future for the company, and that's this trends looks amazing. Some feel more like maybe a cultural shift for you, right? Like I think providing services for the KYC might be more of a shift of culture than providing your AI assistant.
Yes.
Since you're like, you seem to be more focused on the end user at the moment with this whole PLG movement. But I guess another thing which is happening to all startup eventually is to start to productize its services. So and have more business units or things like that. So I assume there will be a point in history where this happens to you guys.
Yep.
Exciting.
I would hope so. Yes.
That's super exciting. So we are at the end. Thank you so much for your time. It was really, really cool.
And so thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to shine a bit of light on what we are doing at Pleo. Like I kept saying, I think this is all way beyond my time. I'm just a messenger. So really appreciate you giving us the opportunity to shine some light on some of the great work that the teams are doing. So thank you so much for inviting me.
You did amazing, man. I don't think it's only the company. So I'll make sure I point to some resources you mentioned about the company. But if people want to engage with you, where should we point them?
I think LinkedIn would be great.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll put your LinkedIn then.
Perfect.
Thank you, Arash.
And obviously, I think if they want to read more about the PLG stuff, there was a recent article on the
Substack,
Kyle
right?
Poyer.
Yes.
Yeah, Substack.
You wrote on Kyle Poyer, OpenView,
Yes.
Substack. A great article.
Yes.
I'll make sure I point to it.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you for listening to the June podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe. This episode is powered by June. For a better way to do product analytics, visit june.so.